Hey everybody, it's Joe Trippi and welcome back to That Trippi Show. This week, New Hampshire is in the books and we're down to 2. Well, maybe really 1, but I'll get into that. We take a look on what might be the worst primary campaign I've seen in decades and where do both sides go from here. Alex, where do you want to get started?
So, first of all, by my count, and this was really just looking at Dropbox, this is our 200th episode, Joe. I really struggled in the 10 minutes before the show that I realized this about what to get you. And I think the best present is that Ron DeSantis is no longer running for president.
How could it be 200? Is it really 200? Wow.
Yeah.
That's scary. Okay.
Anyway, okay. So, well, and I'm sure we'll have some special guests coming up to kind of look back at everything we've done and everything we've talked about. But people don't want to hear that. People want to hear what's going on in New Hampshire. So, Joe, you mentioned it. It's in the books. By the way, your Twitter was an excellent follow on election night. You were making predictions at like 5 o'clock, 5:30 when exits were coming in, which we can get into. I mean, you called it like pretty much exactly. And you've been calling it for like months, years, probably at least like 100 of our episodes by now. Maybe not 100, but close to it. Like what happened?
I didn't quite, look, I thought for a while, for a long time, that if Haley could take second in Iowa, that she'd get a real big boost and actually defeat Trump in New Hampshire. I always thought she was going to perform well there and keep it close. But I actually thought that she had a shot at winning it. But man, the last 2 or 3 weeks in Iowa were just horrible for her. The squeaking in, close third doesn't count, and I'm not sure. Certainly, her performance in New Hampshire, was stronger. I was closer than most people. Everybody else had her being creamed by 20 or 30 points. And, and we're laughing when I said Trump was weaker than people thought, but he is weaker. I've been saying it over and over. Trump is weaker than everybody thinks. And I think people are starting to wake up to that. I mean, you had, my view is these early primaries, everybody else looks at them for, winnowing the field, and that's important. They really do that. But the thing that they always have done that I've always looked for is what are the weaknesses that they're exposing in the front runner? And, in Iowa, you saw Haley beat him in Johnson County. He had real trouble in the cities and suburbs in Iowa. And these are with Republican city and suburban voters.
In a very low turnout, too.
Yeah, a very low turnout, half of what it was last time. They'll blame it on the weather, but it wasn't, you didn't see, he couldn't get much over 40 in a lot of those urban and suburban counties. And then you go to New Hampshire, where the most important thing there is how's a front runner doing with independents? It's one thing if MAGA can deliver you 55% or 50% of the state of Iowa, but there's the other 49% in Iowa, and there's this in the bulk of the others in New Hampshire are independents, and she creamed him. And now it wasn't just the margin that she beat him with independents in New Hampshire, but with moderate Republicans, she wiped him out, I think 2-1. And what was striking was Nikki Haley's actually grew. And at least in the exit polls showed that she was winning 29% of self-described conservatives in New Hampshire. Now that keeps up. If that growth among conservatives continues to happen, we'll see. That means, potentially people could be underestimating her in South Carolina. I mean, she could be, can she get higher than that? We'll see. But look, the results are in. I thought something that John Harwood posted, I think where I said that I thought it was the most prescient tweet of the year. And, he basically had said that, quote, we're in early stages of a massive analytical shift from Biden in big trouble to Trump's in big trouble. And I've really been saying this for a while, that Trump is weaker than people think. The press kept focusing on, Biden's age or whatever, the economy, which just none of that I thought would matter as we get deeper into this year. But the things that do matter is Trump's weakness among moderates, among suburban women, among these independent voters. These are all voters that he needs. He can't lose any of them. He's already stuck at 46%. That's what he got in 2016, 2020. These numbers, suggest to me that, and we've been saying this on this, pod, that ceiling, that low ceiling that he has it's showing signs that it's weakening and lowering. And I think Haley has exposed that, particularly in these New Hampshire numbers.
I mean, I think that the quote from Harwood, I think he quoted John Lemire, who was digging really into this data. I mean, I think he said Trump has a problem no matter what happens in New Hampshire. There's a whole swath of the Republican electorate and a good chunk of independents who appear firmly committed to not voting for him in November if he becomes the nominee, which gets to your point. I mean, those are some stark numbers.
Yeah, well, it was huge. I mean, huge numbers of Haley supporters in New Hampshire. And again, these are, these are independents, but they're GOP leaning. They voted in the GOP primary. Yeah, some of them, a small number might have been some Democrats in there, but the reality is it was some, a lion's share of her vote, a big chunk of it said, we're not going to vote for Trump if he's the nominee. 94% of her vote said they'd be disappointed if Trump was the nominee. And then, smaller share said they wouldn't vote for him. But when you're hitting 94% and she's getting 45% of the primary, that's a lot of Republicans, a lot of independents, and he needs every one of them. And even back in Iowa, it was 20%. It might have been 18, but it was close to 20% that said they would not vote for Trump if he's the nominee. So, and by the way, if any of this was happening to Biden, and we have that number, by the way, in New Hampshire, yes, all those people who voted in the Democratic primary, this doesn't exist and didn't happen because party rules and all that stuff. But, 75% of the electorate came out, Democratic side came out and wrote in Biden's name. And what's really fascinating is when they asked the same question, to the Phillips and Dean Phillips, those that didn't vote for him, would you, what if Biden's the nominee, would you vote for him or not? And, 10% said they wouldn't vote for him. So you look at Nikki Haley getting 45% of the vote and 94% saying they'd be disappointed if Trump's the nominee. You go over the other side, Biden gets 75% of the vote. The opponents, Phillips, et cetera, get and Williamson get
20-ish, 22, yeah, something like
and
that.
And 10% of them won't vote for Biden. Now, Biden, we want all those people to come home. I got it. That's not. I'm not laughing at the 10% number, but it's not what's happening on the other side.
I mean, the thing about a write-in campaign, and Joe, I know you've done them. I mean, I think Lisa Murkowski won one pretty famously in Alaska. I mean, it is not easy. And if you're Dean Phillips right now, having just gotten your ass absolutely handed to you by the guy that everyone thought New Hampshire hated with his approval rating in the toilet, who they had to write in his name, and the quote unquote race was called in like 10 minutes, like that should tell you something about where Joe Biden is. I mean, that is how hard write-ins are.
Yeah, but they are. They're tough. But look, I mean, you look at the other side. Dean Phillips, 24% or 22, whatever it was. I know it's rolling around 20 of the New Hampshire electorate. On the Democratic side, came out and voted for him. Over as a protest or whatever against Biden. But when you look at that, and it was against, like you said, this bunch of other people actually had to get there, write the name in, do all that stuff. And they're probably still counting them because they have to hand count and look at, make sure the guy spelled the name right and all that good stuff. But my point is that 10% said, no, it's not a protest. I won't vote for him if he's the Democratic nominee. That's, like I said, it's a problem. We got to deal with it, but it's not the problem that Trump has with a large share, a much larger share of his own Republican Party. You saw in Iowa, and what you're seeing, particularly among independents, because what happened there was independents, I think, again, it says more about what do they fear? What are they trying to stop? And it seemed to me, if you look at it, the independents did not flood in to the Democratic side to try to stop Joe Biden. If that were the case, it would have been Dean Phillips that was sitting at 45, 46%. And there'd be a whole lot of people saying, and I'm not voting for Biden if he's the nominee. No, folks, that happened on the other side. Those independents flooded the Republican primary. Why? Because lots of them, some of them voted for Haley. A lot of them voted against Trump. And what are they saying? If Trump's the nominee of the Republican Party, they're not voting for him. That should scare the living daylights out of the Trump campaign. But there's a couple other numbers that should scare Trump and the GOP. When you look at the exit poll, the CNN exit poll, at least, they talked on air about 67% of the turnout in the Republican side oppose, 67% oppose a federal ban on abortion, and only half support mass deportation over giving a path to citizenship. I mean, so half the party is opposed to, Trump's, we're going to deport the world on day one, and 67% oppose the federal bans and sort of the extremism. And I suspect what the court did to overturn Roe v. Wade and the Dobbs decision, of course, Donald Trump appointing the judges that did that. So you're looking at, I think, a shrinking ceiling. It's going lower. And at the same time, I think that you get to this point where we're starting to see the anchors, the weight around Joe Biden, particularly on the economy. And we've been saying this on the pod for, 6 months, that when you come out of a big downturn like we're coming out of, and the economy and particularly consumer sentiment starts to leap, people don't feel that, even though their bills are shrinking and their wages are catching up, they don't feel that panic, that fear of an economy, particularly while people are projecting, recession and talking about that incessantly on television. It takes 3 to 6 months for that weight to get lifted, and I think we're starting to see that. We're starting to see.
Well, I mean, you saw it in the results, right?
Yeah.
You saw it in New Hampshire. I mean, and I think Greg Sargent tweeted is basically pointing out, quote, "It's starting to seem like a deep sickness because Joe Biden's hitting 70+% as a write-in, and it's still, why is Joe Biden weak?"
Right.
Trump barely won, and the media says he's strong. I mean, before I know you wanted to get to the Marist poll, but the other one I thought was really interesting was, just for context, Barack Obama, 2012. I don't believe there were any questions about him being the nominee in 2012, unless I'm crazy wrong. He did not win as many votes unopposed on the ballot in 2012 as Joe Biden got as a write-in in 2024.
Yeah. No, that's why Biden is stronger than people think. Trump is weaker than people think, than the pundits and the talking heads think. I mean, let's deal with reality here. The man got 50% of Iowa. He owns this party. Everybody knows he's going to be the nominee. That's what everybody's been told from the get-go, that no one can touch him. Yet 49% of Iowans went to the caucuses and supported somebody else. Now you go to New Hampshire, same thing, 55%. He gets 55. This isn't a giant. This isn't somebody who's like, just roaming the countryside and people are flocking to him the way the press treats it. And even look at South Carolina. This should give somebody some pause if they're on the air yapping about this stuff. Last poll had Trump at 53 in South Carolina. So again, let's look at it. He was at 51 in the around 50, low 50s in Iowa. What's he get? 51. Where was he in New Hampshire in the last polls? Right around 54, 50, I think was where he was. I think it was 53,
and
something like that.
That's where he ended up.
That's where he ends up. And now he's at 53 in South Carolina against the former governor, Nikki Haley, and his UN ambassador that he appointed. I'm not saying that, I'll put it this way, there's no freaking way he's going to beat her like, 60-30 in this. That's not going to happen. That other 47% of South Carolinians, whether they were voting for her in that poll, DeSantis and the others, because these polls were all taken, the last ones were taken before some of this, she's growing. Now, can she grow? I mean, the interesting, that gets back to what I said about conservatives. She grew from Iowa to New Hampshire, even without the big jump, the big, rocket launch out of that a second place finish would have given her into New Hampshire. She grew among conservatives to 29% in New Hampshire. If that growth continues, let's say she grows to 35, 40% among conservatives, he's beating her 60-40. That race is going to be much, much closer there. Can she beat him there? That's a tall order. It is South Carolina. It's a very, very tough state. And the Trump folks have awakened and will be, it will be the ugliest nuclear ads on earth that we've even for South Carolina, which has got a reputation
we'll come back
for
to
eating
what,
that stuff. Yeah.
Well, we'll come back to the Trump Haley in a minute. I mean, the only other thing, and if you look at, I think, Joe, we were talking about this pre-show, the Marist poll of New Hampshire that came back right before Election Day. So this just, I don't understand, and I want you to explain it to me. So the same poll that has Biden's approval rating at 38 has him beating Trump 52-45.
Right. That's
so
what I mean
like,
about
what?
You don't. That's what I mean. It's the head-to-head contest in these polls. Okay, look at them, grain of salt. What you're looking for when you're looking under the head is what doesn't add up, or what is it telling you about what we already know. So what we already know is that in 2022, with Biden's approval trashed, with gas prices, soaring, with inflation just bubbling, out of control, that the economic numbers and his approval rating, if the approval rating had anything to do with the outcome, should have wrecked the Democratic Party, and the Republicans should have rode a big red wave on their surfboards, destroying, sweeping Senate races, House races, et cetera. Well, that didn't happen. So now we're looking at polling, and we've been saying the same thing, that, we're in a much better situation economically than we were in 2022, even if you don't buy the consumer sentiment and the market going to record highs and all that stuff. Even that somehow just, shrug your shoulders at it. We're in a much better economic footing than we were. Gas prices are lower. So all these things are, so then when you see that head-to-head number, 52-45, what it's saying with Biden ahead by 7 points, what you're seeing is, hey, is this starting to look a lot like what the press was wrong about in 2022? Because they're always just look at his approval rating. He's going to get creamed. Guess what? His approval rating I'm pretty sure that there has not been, I don't think we'll ever have. It's going to be interesting to see whether we ever have any president from either party that ever gets to above 50 on their approval rating when we're so polarized.
Hell,
anyway.
I might take 40. I might take the money on 45.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's just, so anyway, I just think you're seeing this over. And by the way, when you start seeing this, the other thing is when you start looking under the hood and you beyond the head to head, and you start seeing the same kind of thing over and over again, you can start to count on the fact that his low approval really doesn't have a whole lot to do with the outcome on the head to head. I mean, you have Trump's approval ratings aren't that great, but also I keep saying this, what we do know and what we've seen repeatedly is when Trump and MAGA, the contrast between Biden and the Democrats and Trump and MAGA that contrast when people get, you know, you get into that frame, it always has benefited Biden and always has hurt Trump and the Republicans. It's why they had a bad 2020, bad 2022, and I think we'll have a bad, even a bigger defeat in 2024 if these trends continue.
Joe, let's say for a second you throw out all the polls, and I want to get back to Nikki Haley now. You can almost take a look at how where Trump sees he is on the campaign from like what he's actually doing and saying. I don't think the media tends to pay a ton of attention to like take him at his word on things, but like the way he's acting, he's weaker than he seems, right? I mean, or he's acting like he knows he's weak, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, he knows, and by the way, his people, he has much smarter, much stronger campaign folks or operatives around him this time. There's no way they don't understand what these results, particularly among moderates, particularly among independents, and what they saw in Johnson County and in the in Des Moines suburbs area of his weaknesses. They understand that. And I look, the other side of that is they probably understand it from a reality mode. Trump, you got to wonder. I mean, first of all, I'm not sure even though he has better operatives, I'm not sure how safe they are right now because, yeah, they may understand that 10 points and, and be a 10-point win, 11-point win and breathing a sigh of relief. Trump, 10 points when you're an authoritarian wannabe dictator is had like a shock. And they, by the way, they never blame themselves. So I think when you see him screaming that she's an imposter, that, I don't get too angry, I just get even. He's sounding, it's clearly just lashing out, as Nikki Haley would call it, a temper tantrum. But, now he's saying that anybody who donates to Bird Brain, his new nickname for her, will be no longer welcome in MAGA and I guess be, put on the list.
Well, I want to read the whole post. Bear with me if you're listening to this because it's kind of wild. Because remember, Joe, I seem to recall you saying that anyone who comes close to beating Trump in the primary, he ain't gonna go play, hug them on stage
Right.
and do a kumbaya moment, right? Nikki Birdbrain Haley is very bad for the Republican Party and indeed our country. I knew Nikki well. She was average at best. She was not one to take on world leaders, and she never did. This was up to me and why they respected the United States. And this is the interesting part. When I ran for office and won, I noticed that the losing candidate's donors would immediately come to me and want to help out. This is standard in politics, but no longer with me. Anyone that makes a quote-unquote contribution to Bird Brain from this moment forth will be permanently barred from the MAGA camp. We don't want them, and we will not accept them because we put America first and always will.
Yeah.
It's a hell of a thing for a candidate to say. It's a weird thing to say. It's not surprising, but it's just weird.
You saw Tim Scott kind of telegraph this, I think accidentally when he said that after the New Hampshire results, they were really had been looking forward to the big money, coming off of Haley and coming to Trump, but that it wasn't happening. So that he really hoped it would happen. And so then the next day, Trump says this. So it's clear, it's clear. Guess what? The big money's not leaping. And so this is, hey, again, blackmail. It gets threats. If you don't give it to me now, don't worry. There's no way back. You'll never be able to come back. By the way, I'm not sure that works because, okay, it means if I'm somebody who's given a lot of money to Nikki Haley, it's like I only have one way out, right? Keep giving her money. And so I think as people might have been backing away from her, they may have unwittingly, or Trump may have unwittingly kind of, encouraged people to hang in there for her. We'll see. But look, yeah, it's desperate. I mean, look, as I was saying, because you got to look at, it's not just me who's talking about his disenchantment, 10%. Tom Nichols, Radio Free Tom on Twitter, said an authoritarian does not like to win by 10 points. And his first targets in power will not be people on the left or in the center, but the people he thinks are betrayers in his own organization. The people desperately and sweatingly try to swear oath to him right now. is what they're all doing. So this is like, it really is. By the way, all this activity, all this action, all this tantrum, the name calling, bird brain, all of that is why these moderates and suburban women and independents that he needs have moved away, embraced
And
Nikki
ain't coming
Haley,
back. Yeah.
and they and are saying they're not coming back. And so he keeps doubling down on it, which is the one thing we all know he will do. And so, it just compounds. Yes, what we know today is that the MAGA, cult base of the Republican Party can give him a 50-point to 49-point win in Iowa, with 49 saying, it gets him 55-45. You can get to 55 in a Republican primary in New Hampshire. And it can keep him sitting around 53 in South Carolina. By the way, all those are numbers around 50 or above, which means it's big enough and strong enough to get him the nomination, so he keeps playing to it. The problem with that is that every day this goes on, he is up there on a limb with a saw, cutting the branch away that holds independents, that has any chance to reach moderates and suburban women. This is all too with Dobbs and other issues that are going to come to the fore when you again look at the New Hampshire numbers, with 67% participating in that primary said that they oppose a ban on abortion. It's pretty,
Right.
it's all bad news for Trump.
So one more number, and then I want to get to one listener question while we still have time. And there are a couple good ones we'll get to in the next couple of weeks, so keep writing them in. But there's one other number. It was from a UMass YouGov poll from, I think, again, like the day before Election Day in New Hampshire. And they asked whether you'd support or oppose, quote, full pardons for any Americans arrested for their participation in the riot at the Capitol on January 6th. So do you pardon the January 6th idiots? Haley, among the people that opposed the pardons, was winning 55-29. With the people that supported the pardons, Trump was winning 65-18. Both of those numbers make sense. Here's the one that I think is another huge red flag for Trump. 58% of the GOP primary voters supported the pardons, which means that 42% didn't. So if you start looking under those numbers, that is very, very bad news for Donald Trump.
This is exactly what I'm talking about. When you look under the hood, do not look at the head-to-heads, but what's going on. And that's, the MAGA base is capable, because look at even that number, 58% of the GOP electorate in New Hampshire support pardon everybody, right? So my point is that base, he keeps locking it in, doubling down, energizing it. And at the same time, that other 42% who, would not support pardons, and a bunch of other, the 67% who don't support a ban on abortion, national ban on abortion, which is going to put him in a tough place sooner or later here. And these other numbers, they have a hell of a lot more impact, I think, or telling a lot more about what the future in the general election may look like than either of their approval numbers. In other words, not just Biden's approval doesn't count. I don't think, there's a ton of people who will, who probably, would, if you on a 0 to 100 scale, would rank Trump as a 0 in their approval rating. So you can get, more intensity, you can get your base to rate you 100, right? But if you're doing it and you're pushing everybody else towards 0, which seems to be happening here because of the extremes on the positions, and I think we're going to see this more with other things that'll go on. Again, we're not even looking yet about, do they, where on some of these other issues that are going to become really, really hot. We'll see, but there are no good numbers that came out of New Hampshire. Some of it was shocking stuff in terms of,
right,
of how how strongly people. I mean, when 94% of her supporters in Iowa, 94 say they'd be disappointed if Trump were the nominee. Look, if she was like, that's what I'm saying. This is weird. If she was, Dean Phillips and got 18% of the GOP primary, and 94% of her 18 said, I'm not going to vote for Trump, that would be a big freaking problem, right? We'd all
Right.
be right. It's not. It's 45% of that primary vote. 94% of them said, I'll be disappointed if Trump's the nominee. And then you look again with these things you're talking about under the hood on pardons, on, the abortion ban, on, on even on the mass deportation, when you've got 47% saying, no, I don't want that. I want a path to citizenship. I mean, this is a Republican Party that's choosing provide a path to citizenship over his, granted it was 50 something percent, 51 or something percent that would say, yeah, let's deport them all. I'm just saying he can't live with only 50% of the party. He needs that 49 that don't agree with him, even on immigration, even though they think it's a very important issue.
So, Joe, before we go, because this may be the last time we talk about him for a while. We got a great listener question. A couple of them were asking about this actually, but I want to shout out Carla from New Hampshire because the timing, obviously, this week. Ron DeSantis is gone. Rank his campaign among the worst train wrecks in presidential campaign history. He's got to be near the top, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's not fair to John Glenn, but his campaign, the Ron DeSantis campaign, reminds me a lot of the John Glenn campaign in 1984, which I would have until now said was probably one of the worst primary campaigns in either party. It's not even a close call. I mean, even that one, Ron DeSantis leaves in the dust for how horribly run this campaign was, all the mistakes that they made. Gosh, I think back in July, I tweeted that he was dead man walking, and you could stick a fork in him because he was done. And his folks all came out and and trashed me and said I was crazy. Which, by the way, there are a lot of people who think that. So I wasn't worried about it. But a lot of people thought when I said Nikki Haley might give him a fight in New Hampshire, thought I was crazy. But their experiment on having a super PAC actually take over the campaign, usual campaign stuff, and basically have all control over it with consultants that were going to like, hey, this is great. I can spend a lot of money and make a lot of money, and I don't have
Do
to
a
deal
puzzle.
with, and I
The
don't,
puzzle was
yeah,
hilarious.
and I don't have to deal with the can. I mean, the one dirty secret, folks. Let me tell you something. If you're a consultant out there, a media consultant, and you could do the candidate, or you could do a super PAC, the reason they all click their heels and can't believe they've been lucky to get the super PAC is because they don't have a candidate. They don't have to list. They can't coordinate. The candidate cannot call them and yell at them. That's illegal. So they know they can do anything they want, and they don't have to report to a candidate. Which on the other side, you go in there and you say to your candidate, Howard, I don't think you should do this, or this is the spot I want to run, and he go and your candidate says, no, I'm not going to say that, or I'm not going to do that, or they go out and say something crazy. You have to deal with it. The super PAC doesn't have to. So that was massively stupid. How they squandered. No one squandered that much money ever. For such a ridiculous result. John Glenn went through a lot of money,
But not $300 million.
not $300 million. No, it was just insane. And I think also to believe you could just be a mini me Trump, and that voters would reject, would embrace you over the real thing, was a massive, error. Although maybe, I don't know if he would have gotten anywhere anyway. But no, it's not a close call. The worst, we're going to give out the award today, the worst primary campaign in the history of American politics in the modern era, because I can't get into what, John Adams and those guys did. I don't know. But is Ron DeSantis. That campaign was just freaking awesome. Awesomely awful.
I'll include this in our show notes this week. There's a great Mark Caputo story in the Messenger. It's called The Inside Story of How Ron DeSantis Got Crushed. And anytime I'm sad, I just read a couple paragraphs from it because it's great.
It's a great read, and he hits it out of the park on explaining exactly how stupid this thing was from the get-go, from the start, from day one. It was the dumbest campaign. And by the way, campaigns do rot from the head, and you can have all that money, but if you have a candidate who just cannot connect to save his life, a lot of this, and by the way, he made these decisions. He said, yeah, let's go do that super PAC. Oh yeah, let Roe go do it. All that stuff. No, it all starts and ends with him. It was just awful. And his campaign was as bad as he was.
Joe, that is a really uplifting place to end today.
Oh God, I can't believe it's been 200 episodes. Thanks everyone for listening to that Trippi show and carrying us this far. We're going to continue to do this through the year, and every Tuesday and Wednesday. Well, I think Tuesday we're going to drop a special. Not every Tuesday, but
I'm excited
Tuesday,
about that one.
This Tuesday,
coming Tuesday.
Yeah, we'll be dropping a special episode with special guests. Kim Alberta will be the guest, talking about evangelical radicalization and their impact of changing the GOP and Trump's sway over them.
One of the smarter conversations I think we've had in a while. Yeah. This was really good.
Yeah, it's really good. I hope people give it a listen. But again, look, you've sustained us through 200 episodes. Unbelievable. Please tell your friends to subscribe to That Trippi Show. And leave a review on Apple or wherever you listen. You can always send us a question to thattrippishow@gmail.com or leave us a question in the review on iTunes. We'll see you Tuesday with a special episode, and then we'll see you next Friday. Be safe. Take care.
Resolute Square.